Chapter 2. Did you have a good visit with your grandmother? The receptionist asked as I signed out from the front desk. Peppermint, I said as I scratched at the paper. Beg pardon? She likes peppermint tea, not chamomile, I said. Oh, all right, she smiled nervously. With honey, I added, as I ambled through the automatic doors, not waiting for a response. I let Blue out of the blazer so she could tend to her needs after being cooped up, and retrieved the cigarette I prepared earlier. I lit it with the battered old Zippo I kept in my left pocket. Sucked the smoke down like water from a straw until the fresh tremble in my hand subsided. Maggie had looked old. Too damn old. She'd looked older than me since sometime in the Hoover administration, and she'd been able to pass as my grandmother since disco. But it was clear that she was nearing the end of the line. I didn't like thinking about that. Maggie was the only person left who really knew me. Sure, I had a contact or two who had some idea that I was something else, who knew that I was older and tougher than I looked, but they didn't know it all. Maggie knew me from the beginning. She was family, and she was going to be gone soon. Hell, who was I kidding? She'd already been gone for a while in a lot of ways. She'd started forgetting things a dozen years ago. Just little things at first. The things you expect when you get on in years. Keys, appointments, the occasional name. But one day, she'd left her house and hadn't come home. It was warm. An Indian summer. So she hadn't frozen when night fell. But her family was alarmed. I wasn't close with any of them. Not anymore. But one of her grandchildren had called me after the police had gotten involved, and they'd scoured the neighborhood with no luck. They thought of me as a cousin, as the grandson of Mama Lena's big brother Frank, who died in the war. I was Lena's favorite nephew, Frank Shepard III or IV, a distant cousin that they hadn't even seen at holidays, but who kept in touch with the Adler family matriarch. It had taken me 20 minutes to find her at the criminally quick drive to her North Seattle neighborhood. Not because I knew where she would go, but because her scent is more familiar than any I know. My old little sister smelled like peppermint and honey, like years of sun speckled on warm skin. She smelled like holding hands on the way to school, like snowball fights, and like the tears she left on my shoulder while our father beat our mom and we held our breath in the closet. She'd walked down an old trail behind an elementary school and sat on a bench near a creek in one of those wooded swaths that Seattle is riddled with. It had gotten dark, and she'd forgotten which way she'd come. She wandered for a while, ripping her clothes on a patch of Devil's Club. The pain in her leg had made her cry out, but that just made it easier to find her. I heard her cry from a half-mile upstream and was at her side a minute later, cradling her in my arms like I had when she was 3 years old and I'd been 9, when she'd had a nightmare but had already known better than to wake our parents. Her son had pulled some strings and arranged for her care in an expensive new nursing home in Bellingham, the town where we'd grown up. I think it was the idea of going home that made her agree to finally give up on living in her own home. She'd never have agreed if she could see the ghosts of our past the way I can. A month later, I'd moved back to the area too, to be near her. She'd been scared of losing herself more than she was of dying. She didn't want to live like this, never like this. Francis, I don't want to, she'd said and clutched my hand fiercely. Don't let me. She couldn't come right out and say it. She couldn't ask me to promise. She was still a good Catholic, like our mama raised us to be. She wouldn't ask me to commit a mortal sin. She never said the words, but we both knew what she wanted. I'd killed for her before, but we were both young then. Now I was old and tired, even if I didn't show it the way that she did, and she was all I had. I was a coward. Selfish. But she still had her moments, didn't she? She'd known who I was today, if only briefly. It took the tea and the music and the taste of blackberry hard candies, but she'd come back. She was still in there. she wasn't gone yet. A cold wind off the bay hit me just right under my glasses and made my eyes water. Okay, girl. Time to get to work, I said to Blue as I hurriedly finished relieving myself behind a tree. I had that uncomfortable crawling feeling at the back of my neck that comes sometimes when I'm being watched. Damn pervert ghosts. Served me right for pissing outside an old folks' home. I kept my eyes down and quickly let Blue into the Chevy, ladies first, and then took my spot in the driver's seat, rolled and lit another smoke, and started the engine. I drove a couple of miles and then pulled onto the interstate headed south. It took Blue a few minutes to realize we weren't headed straight home, but by the time we were passing the lake she knew. She cocked her head and snuffled at me. Don't blame me. This is Mac's idea, I told her. She looked at me skeptically, cocking a single ear at the mention of Mac's name. Won't take long, I promised the dog. She lay back down with a theatrically long exhale and kept one skeptical eye on me from between her forepaws. I kept one hand on the wheel and reached with the other, picking up a torn piece of brown grocery bag that I'd scribbled my notes on. Andy Morgan. Edison Court. Bikers? Rita. Yellow trailer. More info than that, and I wouldn't have been able to fit it on paper scrap. Mac had wanted to give me more details. He'd been a little pushy about it, in fact, but I'm not one for long conversations. The ringing phone had woken me up the day before, sometime after sunset. At first, I didn't know what the hell I was hearing. An alarm? A siren? That was the first impression formed in my drowsy mind. I'd fallen more than rolled out of the nook in my trailer where I slept, but I was in a fighting crouch by the time I opened my eyes. The painful ringing in my ears drawing a reflexive growl and an angry snarl. Tybalt, my furry feline pest control system, who'd been sleeping behind my knees, hissed angrily in protest. The phone rang again, and I realized what it was. Who is this? I growled after picking up the receiver. Who do you think it is, Sherlock? The deep and familiar voice on the other end chuckled. Mac? How? Mac Watson was a private investigator and bail bondsman who ran his own business out of Everett, just outside of Seattle. We'd been partners once, before I decided that it'd be better for everybody if I just crawled off into my little trailer in the woods, alone with my dogs where nobody else could get hurt. He'd still show up at my place with a bottle occasionally, and we'd talk about old times until it was empty. Now and then I'd help him with a case when he'd pique my interest, or if my funds were low enough. Now, Red, Mac laughed, I know you're a little slow, but do I really have to explain how a telephone works? What? No, I said. It was off. The bills, they turned it off. Yeah, and then they turned it back on. They do that when somebody pays the bill. But I didn't. I was still getting my bearings and clawing to catch up. My head was killing me. I did. How else am I supposed to get hold of you? He knew that just showing up at my door unannounced this week was a good way to get mauled, either by Blue and her pack of misfit strays or by myself on the wrong day. You had no right, I barked. You're welcome, he said. I took a second, cursing under my breath as I opened a warm can of beer and wet my cracked lips. I got a job for you, Mac said. That's not how this works, Mac, I said. You know better. I call you. On the phone you stopped paying for? He said. I need your touch on this one. I'm busy, I lied. No, you ain't. It's not a good time, I said honestly. It was Maggie's birthday, as well as the nearly full moon that was already in the cards for the next day. I know, it's your time of the month. He laughed at his own old joke. It wouldn't be safe, I said. It's already not safe. I gotta skip. I've gotta get in court in 2 days, and none of my other people are willing to go to this location. But you've got your thing. My thing, as Mac liked to call it, was exactly the reason I couldn't get mixed up in whatever this was. I've heard a lot of words in a lot of different languages for what I am, but I don't care for most of them. Vrikolaka, Ulfhednar, Vindigo, Myko, Varg, Lycanthrope. None of them exactly rolled off the tongue. Werwolf was the German word for it, as well as the term most people are familiar with who'd seen too many movies. I hate that one. And not just because of the tacky and inaccurate Lon Chaney bullshit that it makes people think of. In France, we were called garou. And I like that as good as any. Mac knows better than to call me a werewolf, so he just refers to my thing in a way that makes it sound like I'm a capo in some supernatural mafia. He had some idea of what I was and some of what that meant I could do, and here he was trying to use it like it was a qualification on a resume. There's a reason these things are best kept secret. I don't care, I said. 2 days would be the full moon. I started to hang up the phone, but Mac's tiny voice in my hand convinced me to wait. It's a kid. Damn him. Go on, I asked. Mac had known me long enough to know just how to push my buttons. A goddamn kid. Shit. Yeah, he said. Bikers, these hard cases who call themselves Los... Where? I interrupted. Trailer park near Burlington. Edison Court, it's called, he said. This kid... Name? I said. Andy, Mac said. Andy Morgan. But listen, Red, this is... Got an address? No, Mac said. But the tip. Some biker's girlfriend named Rita. Says the club has the kid stashed in her trailer. Says it's the yellow one. Red, I'd send somebody else, but everybody is scared of these motherfuckers. See, this kid Andy got mixed up with... I'll get him to you tomorrow, I snarled. Don't call me again. I slammed the phone back in the cradle, cracking the plastic. I ripped the cord out of the wall for good measure, and then scribbled my notes on a piece of the grocery bag that the beer had come in. After that, I finished the beer, and then opened a second to wash down a handful of Vicodin, before nodding off for another 12 or so hours. I knew this trailer park. Edison Court. It was out on the tide flats, about a half hour south of Bellingham. Not all that far from where I lived. That area was full of just 3 types of people. Farmers, bikers, and slow-driving tourists who flooded the area every year to stare dumbly at fields of brightly colored tulips. But the Tulip Festival was still a couple months off. I pulled off the interstate and headed west on the floodplains. On the horizon, seagulls danced around smoke from the distant oil refinery as it rose to join the equally gray clouds. Clouds that threatened to add another dose of slush to the dreary northwest afternoon. Damn it, Mac, I cursed to myself, and Blue cocked an eyebrow. There was a reason I tried not to go out this close to a full moon. The thing in the back of my head was already stirring fitfully. It took a lot to keep the beast in check for these few days. I fished the pill bottle out of my pocket and was disappointed to hear how few pills remained as I shook it. I pocketed the cap and tossed back about half of what was left inside, leaving only 3 or 4 more. I didn't like walking into a situation like this with my senses dulled and my mind foggy, but it was better than walking in howling for blood. With any luck, I could get this Andy kid out of there and down to Mac's place without the need to bust any heads. Then I could get home to the dogs and curl up in a Vicodin coma for the next few days until the damn moon had moved on to a calmer phase. All I had to do was keep the beast in his cage and get in and out without any bloodshed. Deep in my mental cage, however, the mere thought of spilling blood set my other self to growling in groggy anticipation. I wished the damn pills would hurry up and kick in.